Thank you, Dave. That was beautiful. Wonderful way to start our service. And thank you very much. And everyone, I just want to welcome you again. My name is Kathleen. I am the platform assistant today. And who you just heard was Dave Kane, the musician we've had many times. He does an incredible job with our service. We are very fortunate today because our speaker today is Reverend Sherrie Quander, someone we haven't seen in a while. And I'm really looking forward to her talk. It's on called Invisible Bondage. And now for our centering prayer, I actually picked something that I read in Center for Action and Contemplation this week. It is a, a little quote from Linda Anderson Little, a minister. It's called Embracing Darkness and the Solar Eclipse. The eclipse reminds us to linger in the darkness, to savor the silence, to embrace the shadow, for the light is coming. The resurrection is afoot. Transformation is unfolding, for God is working in secret and in silence to create us anew. Amen.
Thank you so much. That was just fantastic. That just put me in such a nice, calm, serene place where life is good. So thank you for your talent. Oh, good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to be back with all of you again. I am one of these people that likes to observe how art imitates life and life imitates art. So I'm someone who really enjoys a good movie, and I'm one who really enjoys a good miniseries. And last January, I had to change cable companies. Long, crazy story. But once I got this, part of getting the new cable company, I got to have HBO Max. And I'd never had HBO before. So I thought, well, what have I not seen that's been on HBO? So I thought, oh, let's check out the good movies and miniseries. So I stumbled upon the series, The Gilded Age. Now, I did some binge watching for the first two seasons, and I was absolutely hooked. The third season began about 4 weeks ago. And so, just as an FYI, I am like unavailable to the world between 9 and 10 on Sunday night, at least for the next 4 weeks, anyway. So, I love a good story about people, and people are my favorite sport. I love to observe how people move through their lives, navigating their challenges, navigating their growth, navigating those things that become important to them, growing into who they are. And I was watching this series, and the series takes place in New York City from 1870 to the 1900s, which was the golden age of industry and growth. As I am watching the stories of these lives, there was one common thread that just became so evident to me, that everyone was experiencing the concept of bondage, that everyone lived in some dynamic of bondage. Mr. Webster and his dictionary, I took a second just to look up the word bondage. And in the dictionary, it states it's a state of being, usually by compulsion, such as a law. And they gave the example of slavery or serfdom. It also asks the question in the dictionary, do you have the freedom of self-control? Now, the title of my talk today is Invisible Bondage. And this is a type of bondage that has no physical bounds, has no jail bars, no walls, no doors. It is a consciousness, and it is just as confining as if it had bars, and if it had doors, and if it had walls. So I get to ask the question of myself, am I in bondage to my desires, my self-esteem, my social expectations, my desires for my life, my societal expectations, my judgments, or my ego? I get to check in with myself and ask these questions. What is holding me back? Where do I feel caged in? Now, Charles Fillmore wrote, the fact that you have an ideal condition or world in your mind comes with it the possibility of its fulfillment in expression. To think is to express yourself, and you are always thinking. We're always thinking. Julian Fellows, the creator of the Gilded Age, and he also created Downton Abbey, bases his story, this story, on the lives of some historical characters that lived during this time in New York City. It was the beginning of the industrial age, and in that industrial age included manufacturing. It also, the other big thing that was taking place that was coming into fruition was the extension of the railroad across the United States. There were businessmen and bankers, and they're all trying to either help one another or interfere with one another to get involved in the next big money-making deal. There were some ruthless men who dealt in blackmail. They bullied one another, and they threatened one another. There were con men and con women looking to just plain steal other people's money. There was no governing body like the SEC or to be able to set boundaries for how people utilized other people's money. They did things on supposed integrity and a handshake with a little corruption thrown in on the side. There was a class system. Those with money and their servants. There was a class system within the class system. No servant was ever to get above their station. They received no support from their fellow workers. If for some reason someone managed to get a job, inherit some money, meet a person that takes them outside of their perceived station, they were ridiculed. People were afraid to grow out of their station for fear of not being accepted, for fear of being excluded, for fear of not being able to manage whatever it was that they gained. They supported one another's growth as long as they didn't, as I used to say, get too big for their britches. There was a class system within the races. The Black people who were fortunate enough to have been raised in the North that had never experienced firsthand the cruelty of slavery took time to look down on those former slaves who got out of the South after the emancipation, managed to get to the North, managed to get an education, and create their own businesses and create their own families and their own success. They had trouble accepting each other. There was skinny support with respect to people within the races supporting one another for all sorts of reasons. Meanwhile, the women, the wives of the rich and famous, were attempting to claw or actually the wives, everybody's wife who's had any ounce of money or thought they had any ounce of money, they were trying to claw their way to the top of the existing social circles. There were three basic levels of society. The old money, and those were the people who inherited it. The ones who had worked for their money, who had earned their money, who were referred to as the nouveau riche. And then the other people, everybody else. And so it made no difference how much money those who were supposedly classified as rich had if you were not welcome at the high society events. It was about finding out who's at the top of the pecking order in society and winning that person over. And many of the women who were considered old money, they had judgments around anybody who was considered nouveau riche. They're just new money people. They don't count. We don't have to accept them. And it all became about judgment. They didn't care if you were, how wealthy you were. If you didn't fit in, if the person at the top of the social pecking order didn't like you, if they had just made up their mind, well, we got enough people, we don't want any more, you were just plain out. A lot of the women, after they had daughters, planned the lives of their daughters. They spent time sitting down trying to figure out, let's see, who can I marry my daughter off to? Somebody has got to have money. And so Julian Fellowes, in this particular series, decided to focus some of his characters on some of the historical people who were living in New York City at that time. So one of his main families in his series are fashioned after the Vanderbilts, William Vanderbilt and his wife, Alva. And they had, Vanderbilt, of course, was a railroad magnate. He was nouveau riche as far as the rest of society was concerned. So that meant the wife was nouveau riche. And so she had to figure out how to climb to the top. And so she would manipulate, she would lie, she would pit people against one another to do her best to get into that society. And her biggest, what I consider faux pas, was that she decided to marry her 18-year-old daughter, Consuelo, off to a British duke. And that way her daughter would become a duchess. And that just sort of capped everybody else's daughters and who they were married to. So, of course, she didn't care that the guy was older than her daughter. She didn't care that the guy he didn't have any money of his own. He didn't manage his money in England well. So she just decided, well, I'll pay him a dowry to marry my daughter, and then we'll pay him an annual fee to take care of my daughter, to take care of her, specifically what she needed. Well, that was it. So we set up the wedding of the century. We marry my child off. I don't care if she is about as unhappy as they get, not knowing this guy, let alone not loving this guy. But this got her mother to the top of the heap. History tells us that the daughter ended up marrying this guy and getting shipped over to England, back to where he lived, and ended up in this old, rundown, cold, damp, huge castle after she had come from her warm, snug home in downtown New York City. And so she had no way out. The daughter, Consuelo, felt that she was in bondage for life and had no choices and no way out. So the daughter lived with this guy and allowed the universe to guide, direct, inspire, and prosper her. Because she had no way of figuring out in her mind at that time, at 18 or 19, she just thought she was done in. She just thought it's all over. So our question today is, are we living in any kind of invisible bondage? Do we have class systems in our head? Do we have judgments in our head about ourselves or other people? In his book, The Principles of Successful Living, Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, wrote, "No person whose entire time is spent in the contemplation of limitation can demonstrate freedom from such limitation." He went on to write, "All nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual, that it may unloose its own energy." So the power of God, which we all know is everywhere present, lives and has its being within each of us all the time. Even though it appeared that Consuelo Vanderbilt was in the most miserable situation, she just got up each day and put one foot in front of the other. And within 10 years of being married to him, that marriage just dissolved all by itself. Nobody had to do anything. They did not communicate at all. He went his way. By that time, she'd fixed up the castle. And so she was still living in the castle, but he was off and gone. And getting a divorce back then was just a small act of God. So she just decided that she was going to go out into the world and find something to do. And she went out and she decided to help women and children, that she was going to feed the poor, to help single mothers, whether they be whether they'd be divorced, whether they'd be widowed, whether they had never been married, but they had children. She went out and put her time and her money and her energy into building and creating environments to protect these women. She went out and she began campaigning for women's rights. She got majorly involved in the suffragette program. She went through Europe campaigning for women's rights, building places for women to stay. And before she knew it, she had become one of the world's greatest philanthropists. And she had focused her energy on helping women find their power, helping them understand that they don't just get to be rejected and thrown out because they didn't fit into whatever class society they were supposed to be fitting into. And as time went on, she was granted a divorce. And ultimately, and later in life, she did meet a wonderful man who she spent the rest of her life with, who was kind to her, who looked after, made sure she had what she needed, let her go do her philanthropic work. And so Spirit had just started operating in her life, unbeknownst to her at the time, probably, and guided her to the highest and best good that she could contribute to this world. Now, Charles Fillmore also wrote, to think is to express yourself, and you are always thinking. She began to think. She began to read. She began to get outside of herself. Now, I believe we could all agree that currently our United States society and humanity is in a bit of disarray right now. People in political positions of power are desperately trying to put us in some variation of bondage. And so here we have an opportunity as individualized expressions of God to either allow ourselves to become so angry about the fact that this process is going on that that anger begins to chew at our spirit, or we get to begin to start doing our spiritual work. we get to start putting more energy into recognizing that no matter what any of this craziness looks like, that God is in the middle of it by means of me. And so we can allow ourselves to step outside of any fear of mental bondage, any fear that we're going to lose who we are, any fear that our country is going to explode. We get to know in the core of our being that no matter what's going on here, divine order is taking place. And I know, and I'll speak for myself, I know that that can be difficult at times, extremely difficult at times. So we metaphysicians know how to do this. We know how to pray. We know how to go into our meditation. We know how to follow that still small voice within us that guides us to participate in some good trouble. We know how to allow ourselves to grow in our spiritual awareness and stand in our spiritual power. Ernest Holmes wrote, "We have thought that outside things control us, when all the time we have had that within us which could have changed everything and given us freedom from bondage." I will repeat that. Ernest Holmes wrote, "We have thought that outside things control us, when all the time we have had that within us which could have changed everything and given us freedom from bondage." Change your thinking, change your life. We, like Consuelo Vanderbilt, allow any and all perceptions of bondage to flow from our consciousness. Are we able to let spirit work through us by means of our unlimited creativity? To engage ourselves and others in activities of caring for others and believing in the world that works for everyone? Can we look at these natural disasters as opportunities to step up and put the demands on our government that we require to support us in rebuilding lives? We are always thinking. So I was looking through our 12 powers, and I noticed an affirmation. And it says, wisdom, judgment, discernment, purity, and power are now here, expressing themselves in the bounty of holiness. Jesus Christ is now here, raising me to his consciousness of divine judgment and the wisdom of divine mind. It is expressed in all that I think, say, and do. So we get to remember, with God, all things are possible. And so it is. Amen. Join me now as we settle into our chairs, as we take a deep breath, and as we relax into the truth that God is all there is. I breathe in this truth and this understanding that the power, the life, and the source whence all things come lives and has its being in and through and as me, right here and right now. I am an individualized expression of all that God is. I am whole, I am perfect, I am complete, just as I am. I choose right here and now to open my heart and to open my mind and to use that creative energy that lives within me to think, to grow, to love, and to stretch beyond any bondage in which I may still be living. I let go of anything that binds me, that holds me back. I let go of anything that tells me I'm not good enough. For we understand and know this is not the truth. So I relax into that truth of knowing that I am guided, directed, inspired, prospered, and blessed on my way to the magnificent experience of my life. Each one of us is in this life with the opportunity to grow into our highest and best. Each one of us is an individualized expression of God. No two of us are alike. God created variety. God created the opportunity for us to be different enough to learn from one another. We have opportunities to be accepting of one another, to allow each of us to live our lives in peace. So I know as I take these next few moments of silence to feel that warmth within the core of my being that I know to be the life of God. For that light burns bright, that warmth brings energy to my body and my mind. And so I am sitting in these few moments of silence as I allow myself to feel this peace. I accept and know that no matter what is going on outside of me, that I am peace. I am light. I am love. I live in freedom, knowing that I am growing into a greater purpose. I respect others. I give thanks for my life. I give thanks for all that I am and for all that I have. I know that I am blessed. I know that this unity group is blessed. I know that we are in one mind and in one consciousness of love, one mind and one consciousness of growth, and one mind and one consciousness of joy and gratitude. So I breathe in one big breath, and I exhale, and I relax into my week, knowing that I go forth whole, perfect, and complete, healthy in mind, body, and spirit, giving of my highest and best. And so it is. Amen.
Now for my closing prayer, I picked lesson 349 in A Course in Miracles, just a little piece of it. Today I let Christ's vision look upon all things for me and judge them not, but give each one a miracle of love instead. Amen.